today. I'm with FP Genetics. I'm the Director of Market Development with the company, and been spending quite a bit of my time with rye in the last couple of years as we're starting to take a different look at the various opportunities with this particular crop. Really, we've only been in Canada with hybrid rye now for 5 years. In Europe, they've had hybrid rye for about 15 now, so they've had quite a bit more experience with the crop than we have here in Canada. So in this 5 years, our first focus really was on grain and looking at hybrid rye for grain production. And we very quickly found that there was a huge revenue opportunity for farmers in grain, looking at anywhere from 20 to 30 bushel to the acre more over conventional rye type products. And when we do all the math, hybrid rye in grain actually can provide a grower more revenue, or as much revenue as any other crop that you could really look at, other than potentially canola might be a little bit higher if you've got a really good yield in the crop. So that's really kind of what's driven hybrid rye in Canada, is it's looking to grain and the improved quality that it has for the miller. In 5 years, the managed to take about 50% of the crop in Canada in the hybrid rye versus the conventionals. In the last 3 years, we started looking at opportunities on the forage side of things, and that's why we're here today. And I certainly thank the MBFI for offering to do a small plot trial here and take a look at some things. And I think there will be lots of other things that we're going to need to understand as we move forward and try to understand what the value of this new technology might be. What we've done here is very quickly, we just chatted last fall, actually a week before seeding, and we decided we just wanted to put hybrid rye in the field. We have it up beside some conventional rye, Danko, and what we want to do is take a look at it from a grazing perspective and a green feed perspective. The idea will be is we'll let this grow in the spring and get the cattle on it and graze it, and then take a green feed off afterwards and see how that works. And our first work that we've done in rye for forage has been more around silage and looking at hybrid rye versus either other winter crops or spring crops, and looking at it for the amount of silage it produces. Does an excellent job. We've been seeing on average about a 20% yield increase versus other options for that, and very comparable quality as far as other crops that we've been looking at when we compare it to other cereals. So that side of it has looked quite good. So now we'll get some ideas on different options where we can look at it in a grazing standpoint, along with potentially either followed up with a silage, or potentially followed up with a green feed, or even could be followed up with taking it for grain if that's what a producer would want. The thing that I find very exciting about hybrid rye, as Michael has already talked about, is it does give us an opportunity to get a crop in the ground in the fall, or it actually could be brought even in the summertime, and we can talk about that later. But to get it in the fall after another crop is off, and get some green growing here as we're seeing here right now, to keep the biosystem active, and it's certainly doing that. You can kind of see even through some of the snow here that we are seeing plants poking through, so they're it's definitely still respirating in the field and growing at this time. This is about the perfect height for what we'd like to see going through into the winter, so that we get good winter hardiness of the crop. So around that 3-leaf with a tiller or two coming out of it, and I think that's pretty well what we're seeing here today. So that's really what we're looking for, to get that crop off really quick into the springtime and get it growing quickly. So you know, hopefully we'll find out here next spring how the cattle do on it from a grazing perspective, and then what's still left that can come to make a decent haylage in this particular case, what we're trying to do here. So maybe I'll just open it up for questions. You know, I could talk about rye for a long time. I think what's really unique about it is that you will have that opportunity to do different things with it. It will never ever take over any system, but I think it fits into systems where it can give you an opportunity as a producer to have a forage there quite a bit earlier than anything else. So with hybrid rye, we would expect it to be available for grazing about 2 weeks prior to what a winter wheat would be, and which would be probably about 3 weeks before what you would find your perennial pasture to be available. So one of the advantages is it would give you that quick early grazing in the springtime. On the other hand, same thing in the fall. If it comes in after another crop, let's say you're putting it after green feed say a green feed of barley or oat, and you want to have something in there after, you can go ahead and plant that right in end of July, and you'll have a really nice grazing for the cattle in the fall. Right at this time of year, they could be in here grazing right now if that was planted at that time.
You planted in July, what's it going to look like next year?
We're working with that, and we've actually worked at planting it in June, July, August, and September.
Okay,
this was seeded in September, around the 5th, so right at the beginning of September. So when you seed it at that time, it's too late to get a grazing for it. Just doesn't get enough time to grow. So we have found the optimum time for, if you want to get a fall graze, is probably seeding it in the end of July would be about the right time.
Let's say you seed June or July, how does that affect your spring production if you want to use it the coming year?
That is something we're going to be finding out. We don't have the answer for that yet. We have seeded in June. Usually if we seed in June, we'll get at least 2 grazings off it, maybe a third one. In July, we would get 1 grazing. And then we would have to see what that's going to be like as we move to the springtime. I can tell you from what we've seen so far, it looks like July grazing is probably about, or seeding would be the optimum to still get a good crop off in the spring. It's looking to me like, from what I've seen, if you're into June seeding, yes, you'll get a bunch of crops that year, but overwintering in the next spring is going to not be so good. So I think generally speaking, rye is a little bit different than wheat in that it uses about 20% less nitrogen than what a wheat crop would use per pound of product produced. So because we're sitting here to target a yield of about 20 to 30% more than wheat, we put about the same nitrogen on as what we do for wheat. As far as potassium, potash, and sulfur, we'd be putting, recommendations would be to put on the same amount as what you're doing for wheat, maybe a little more potash than what you would do for wheat. In this country, I know there's not a lot of potash used, but a little bit with rye is good because it is a heavy potash user.
60, 30, 30, 20?
Net pounds in the ground, so probably, let's say on nitrogen, you'd probably want to be close to, call it 90. Phosphate, you'd want about 30, yeah. Potash, you'd want the equivalent of 30 to 40, which of course there's lots in the ground already. And sulfur, you'd want about 10, 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about 70, somewhere around $70.
Some.
Fertilizer cost.
Yes.
And how much is the seed?
The seed on hybrid rye is the expensive part. It's depending on if you're using a seed for forages, the cost of the seed there's about $55 an acre, and if you're looking at grain, and depending which one you're using, it could take you up to about $65 an acre
So
for
about
cost.
140 an acre.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
All in.
And then grazing wise, depending on like how much biomass do you think you'd be able to harvest? Do you think you could pull 1,000 pounds an acre of biomass and then pull green feed?
What we would expect on a tonnage basis, yeah, so you would be able to have a really good 2 to 3 weeks of hitting it fairly hard for grazing in the fall, and then my expectation would be on an average year.
I'm more interested in the spring side and getting green feed. So I'm not worried so much. Like this is to go after a field of green feed oats, seed this stuff in.
Yep.
And then the following year, look to graze it the earliest you possibly can and try to set it up as a system where you can graze cows 3 weeks earlier than you normally would.
Right. So you would like to have that period of grazing for 2 to 3 weeks before your other stuff is ready, and then let it go to a green feed. Yeah. I would expect in that you'd be looking way more than 1,000 pounds. I'd be hoping that on the green feed you'd be at least 4 tons an acre.
That's including the grazing?
Including the grazing. I would think so. We've seen, just to give you an idea what the range is, it has quite a range. We've seen anywhere from 5 tons to 19 tons an acre on hybrid rye. And that's probably what got us going the first time was Colk Farms. They're a feeder out of Alberta. And they tried it the first time in 2018. And they got 19 tons per acre on the hybrid rye, and their Austenson barley was 12. Now that was all on irrigation, so it had all the groceries to it. So we know the upside is there if Mother Nature is working for us. But I wouldn't expect in dry land that you're going to get that kind of numbers. But in dry land, I would still expect you should get. If you weren't grazing it in the spring, I would think you would want to be shooting for anywhere from 6 to 8 to 9 tons an acre. If you were grazing it, I think it's going to knock it down for sure. The question is how much and how much rain you're going to get after that grazing. That's going to be a lot to do with it. That would be talking wet tons per acre. Yes. Thank you. 60% moisture or what? That'd be at, yes, silage, so that'd be at 60% moisture, right? Yeah.
So it'll be about 1,400 pound bales an acre plus grazing.
Okay.
I think that's what I'm understanding, or no?
I don't want to, because I'd have to figure that out what that is, and you would know that better than I do.
Doing for, let's say I've got a field of green feed oats and I've got the green feed oats harvested. I drill this stuff in for my subsequent year.
Yep.
What do I got to do for weed control?
So just right when let's say you're taking your oats off in about August, that's sometime in August, okay. Then I would let it, you'd probably be a week before you get into it or whatever. Spray it with Roundup for a burn-off. Okay. And if you've got some winter annuals in there, it probably wouldn't hurt to put a smidge of some type of like a refine or which one am I thinking of? Express, that's the one. I'd put Express in with it, and then go ahead and seed it, and right after the burn off. And so if you're doing it in August, yeah, you wouldn't probably be getting I don't think you would get a graze. You might.
Yeah, I'm not too excited about grazing it in the fall. I think you really affect your subsequent years.
Yeah. So and so if you're going to do that, then you would just let that. You'll have beautiful growth in the fall for sure at that point in time, and you should have a good overwinter. And generally speaking, you know, the earlier you grow a winter cereal in the fall, the quicker it comes back in the springtime. So you will get that benefit of being able to put it in early like that.
So have you, in any of these systems, have you considered putting a legume with it to help with the nitrogen, or it just doesn't work?
We've done that. Actually, Baron at ASC in Lacombe has done some work with that. He's from the Carberry area originally, and he's done that. And you'd have to talk to him, but I don't think he saw a whole lot of benefit from intercropping the legume to it. It just didn't. Now that was more for a summer seeding grazing, so we weren't talking about spring.
Yeah, well, the reason I'm asking is, like, what say you put in, like you're putting your rye crop down and you put sweet clover with it.
Right. I think that they do that in Europe, I know for sure. And I do know they intercrop well. And but we haven't had any experience here in Canada on that. So
yeah, that's commonly done here now by, you know, guys that are starting to understand that more diversity has benefits, right? Like mixing a legume with a grass. Like if you think about what this was prior to us coming here and starting to farm, you know, this was a diverse mix of plants and animals. It was basically a big pasture, right? The prairies, the northern Great Plains. It was roughly 75% grass, about 20% legume, or 20% forb and 5% legume. Okay, so you know, there's good reasons why we've done what we've done in prairie ag to grow, you know, monocultures, but there's also good reasons to sort of think about moving back towards growing things in diverse mixes and the benefits of doing that. And there are guys doing that research, like Tillman out of Minnesota. He's an ecologist who studies sort of agro environments, agroecology, basically, you know, prairie agriculture. And 25 years ago, when he sort of thought, you know, is there anything really interesting here to this diversity question? Does diversity matter? And now he reports back 25 years later that the single most important variable for the productivity of an ecosystem is the number of species in that system, the biodiversity. And the way he explains it is it's kind of like any business or organization. There's a diversity of people. You know, every person has a different job, has different skills, has different talents, right? You wouldn't want an organization to have, you know, clones of everyone, you know, having the same set of skills. It's sort of the same where every different species, every different organism does a job. And when that organism isn't there to do that job, those jobs don't get done. And then we have to start looking at, you know, other ways to provide those jobs to get done. So fall rye and hairy vetch is kind of a no-brainer, and hairy vetch will overwinter. Sweet clover, red clover, all are good choices with any of the winter cereals.
The only thing I would maybe just say to that end of things, just because of course of the forage end that's where I'm from, with some of that stuff, the limiting factor is the fall grazing. So when you're doing a sweet clover or red clover, if you graze it that fall, so the July, the August planting, there isn't enough root mass for those plants to be grazed to actually survive.
Yeah, you'd have to be careful with that. But
So you're thinking more in the scenario like what he's thinking.
Absolutely,
We're not
yeah.
doing a fall grazing, but coming in the spring.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Then we're okay. You're still going to see some plant loss in the spring because, again, with some of those legumes, they won't have set and not so much root mass to live. They'll actually physically pull some of the plants out just because they don't set a lot of roots in that time. But you would be the same thing. The earlier you seeded the year before, the more that stuff would be established and the better that it would handle that. So you would just unfortunately limit a little bit of your silage content. Like you probably, depending on what happened after you grazed, you may knock that legume back a little bit. But again, I think worthwhile wise, absolutely to put a legume in if the end results are to be silaged or grazed. So,
But 2 different seeding depths again, so 2 passes or not.
yes, we would always say 2 passes because mixing it together can result in burying the forage seed and having issues with germination. So.
Okay, and then
What about just on a cover crop basis? So using the rye as the cover crop, and when you take it off in the spring,
Absolutely.
you could also see an opportunity there, and then you would have your legume come following, right?
So the only thing there is you would just have to make sure that you're seeding your legume, your rate based on the idea that this is going to become a perennial crop for you. So like with alfalfa, you would want to make sure you're putting 10 pounds of alfalfa down with it. Versus if we were just doing it as an add-on, we would only ever recommend maybe 2 to 3 pounds of seed. But again, that's on the idea that this is, a next year shot, and then that's it. So,
Like
but
one,
yeah, I think fall rye has a really good opportunity as a cover crop.
Yeah.
So.
because one spot where I think it might really work well is in a dairy scenario where a guy wants to take the rye off for high quality instead of yield. So then you'd be taking it off like at really high digestibility, like at TDN numbers getting up to 100, and but then you're taking that off in about June 20th,
Yep.
and there you'd only be getting about 3-4 tons, but then you've got all the rest of the season for that legume to grow.
Basically set yourself up for a really good second cut of alfalfa.
Yeah.
Or whatever your choice is in the legume. So yeah.
so you're not worried about competition, like that stuff is coming on pretty aggressive in the spring to seed alfalfa.
Alfalfa's pretty aggressive. It'll choke out a lot of things on its own. So no.
Just an establishment, really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't always recommend it, but we've got lots of guys that even with oats, I mean, they'll do 2.5 bushels of oats with their alfalfa as their cover crop, and the alfalfa always pulls through, or 99%. The years that it doesn't is when moisture is a factor, where the oats are going to be the dominant crop, so they literally just can't pull what the oats are already taken. So.
But in his scenario, what he's looking at, what do you think, what percent of that dry matter that you're going to be taking off as a green feed is going to have legume in there with that really aggressive rye?
It's really going to depend on what the seeding rate of the legume is going to be.
Okay.
So again, for the most part, for the guys that are just adding a little bit of a legume in to give a little bit of a diversity and a little bit of a bump in N for the soil and stuff like that, I would say you're probably only going to say 15 to 20%, and that's probably on the high side, is going to be actual legume. Versus, like I say, with the intention of seeding it to where that's the next future crop after the rye is gone, then you're going to see quite a bit. Then you're still probably only going to be 40, because again, the rye is still going to be dominant in there for the first cut. But once the rye is gone, the alfalfa is going to come back, and that's going to be the dominant crops. And whatever volunteers do survive with the rye, that's it's just a little bit more benefit in the crop. I mean, and it'll fade out after that year again. So.
Yeah.
What's the difference between hybrid rye versus fall rye?
So when we say hybrid rye, we're talking hybrid fall rye. So it is a fall rye, and but are you asking me the difference between it and the conventional? So really the difference between the two of them is it's just really all about the aggressiveness of the plant. With the hybridization, you just have so much more vigor within that plant. And over the last 3 years or 5 years since we've been in Canada here, it doesn't seem to matter what the conditions are. open pollinateds that we have are always about 30% less yield. So whatever the yield is, you can knock 30% off, and that's probably where your conventional is going to be.
Okay, so then let's say you've taken, say we got a 40-acre field, we're going to cut 30 of it for, going to cut 30 of it for green feed, keep 10 acres, and harvest that for grain.
Yep.
Can that be seeded within the own system or no? Or is it sterile?
No, you can. If you want to keep if you want to keep a certain portion for grain, no problem.
Seeded to propagate it.
Oh no, you wouldn't. No, that would be then you'd be back to a conventional product again.
Oh really?
Yeah, in 1 year it would take you right back to conventional. It's just like you would never take hybrid corn, which is really exactly the same process with rye, and you wouldn't take the seeds from that and replant that. It's just not worth it. Then you might as well just replant a conventional.
So the seeding rate is quite a bit different.
The seeding rate is different between the two. The conventional, you're looking at roughly a bushel-ish. Generally speaking, with hybrids, you're down seeding closer to a bushel an acre.
Bushel, and it's
Yeah.
$70 a bushel.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually sell it by the unit at 1 million seeds per unit, so that very similar to corn, so that you're always going to get the proper viability in your seeds. So whether you got small seeds or big seeds, you won't be paying more or less. It's always the same. So and it's based on the germination and everything else. Yeah. The one thing I would say, just to make sure that we're clear, is that if you're only going to seed a rye for grazing on its own, you're probably not going to get the value out of a hybrid. That in that case, you're probably going to see that your open pollinateds or even a winter wheat will do just as well if you're only doing it for grazing. So to make a hybrid really work, you need to either want to take it to a green feed or to a silage or to a grain. And that's when you'll get the real value out of the product. So if you're looking for something just for grazing, probably the hybrid rye wouldn't be your first choice. Yes?
Can you see it? I will say what I did in 2019. I was kind of brave. I seeded conventional rye
Yep.
with barley, spring seeded.
Yep.
So the barley grew out, and to my neighbor's consternation, it just poked through, because at harvest time I took the barley off as a crop. It was the barley was just about this higher above the rye.
Okay.
We managed to straight cut it, took a grain crop off, and then we had snow way too early. So in spring this year, I had the cows in there, and they grazed it. I left it in there. I didn't have a crop on it for the rest of the summer. They grazed it with a adjacent pasture, so they ruined it. Asking is, can you do the same thing with hybrid rye, spring seed with barley, or take the barley off for a crop, or take it off for green feed, and then keep the cows out in fall for next spring grazing? Will that work?
The answer to that is I don't know. I don't know. I guess all depends on the weather system and so on and so forth. From what you're saying, that could work, and it maybe should work, but will it always work? I don't know, and we don't have enough experience in Canada to even talk about that. So
We did the same thing at our Johnson farm. So it's a very sandy soil, and we spring seeded a barley with Hazlitt fall rye, and we took the barley off as a green feed, and we did smaller bales, and we grazed them where they fell out of the baler, and we just strip grazed them in the fall, and then we actually had pretty good spring grazing as well. So that's where we did our spring calving as well. So we pounded it out, because then we knew we were going to be trying to establish a forage into that field. So we kind of used it as it was a kind of a shabby forage stand. So we sprayed it out, put barley and rye in together, got the green feed, got 2 seasons of grazing, and then sprayed it out again, and then worked to try and establish a forage into that. So it's kind of like a segue for weed control, because the rye does a really good job of smothering and out-competing the weeds as well.
One thing that you might consider, and I don't know if the time would work. I know you said you're up at Erickson, so you're a little bit higher up, so I don't know if it would work as well there as it might in southern Manitoba. But certainly we are looking at and using rye as a double crop product in southern Alberta. And what we're doing is we're putting rye in the fall. We harvest it in June for silage, and then we put either barley or oat in, and we take a full green feed of barley oat off that year. But whether we can do that in Erickson, I don't know. Guaranteed? Nope. Okay.
Not yet.
Yes.
A little more climate change here.
Yeah.
Susceptibility to weed strict disease.
Yes.
Doesn't it have susceptibility to that disease?
I don't know the answer to that. I just heard for the first time this disease actually this year, and it seems like it's poking its head up all over the place as a new problem of a disease, which to our understanding is we don't have anything in Canada that is resistant to that disease, and so.
Referred to as a green bridge, and I was wondering what was grown here before that was
Barley.
okay?
It was barley. Maverick barley was here.
And was it harvested as grain or as green feed?
Green feed.
Oh, okay, so fairly early.
Yeah.
What time?
I want to say middle of August. Yeah. And then we did do about probably 260 grams of glyphosate as a control, just because a lot of these fields have a lot of strong weed populations. And then this will go into a graze, and then we'll be green feeding this as well. We don't have the capacity here we just use cows for everything. Cows and balers. Yeah.
So, a lot of green feed is pretty miserable to dry down to put up as dry feed. What's the hybrid rye like? Does it hold on to water like there's no tomorrow since it's a rye?
I can't speak to that because I don't know. We've done most of our work on silage up until